So, I mean, we were in the middle of boost control at some point here, sorry. Basically, like, understood, the closed loop means you're setting a target and it's trying to meet the target within specification. An open loop means you're giving it a duty cycle all the time. I mean, they both have their ups and downs. I think it's easier to do open loop and just set a raw duty a lot of times and just give it what it wants. Unless you have a complicated car, you're working on traction management and other stuff like that, you can enable closed loop, but at the same time you can use the boost timed from launch and the ramp with open loop too, just raw duty cycle numbers. So that's all, and that's all like vehicle dependent. Like a lot of times we'll tell people it's whatever you can hook at that RPM and that boost, and then try to ramp it in as fast as you can in between 1 second and 2 seconds to full boost. If the car and the chassis works good, like my buddy's Mustang, on a bad day we would set it at like 1.5 seconds and pulled the suspension limiters in the front like wide open, and we went to Cecil our first time and he hung like 3 wheelies in a row, like scratched his parachute mount. And we're like, okay, this track works really good. So we had to adjust everything from there. But yeah, that's vehicle dependent. I mean, I can answer specific questions if you have them, but just explaining it I think is good. Yeah, too much, too little.
No, I didn't realize.
just enough.
Once you really started going on that, I just realized that was, making a little more.
Oh yeah, I mean, one quick thing is if you turn on like boost timed from launch, and you go right back in, it says here boost delay, and this is the percentage to full duty cycle off the launch over amount of seconds. So when you release the trans brake, it knows you're coming off the launch and it applies that ramp rate. So if you're watching the data log and you say you're running 60% duty cycle and you launch, it'll start at 0 and it'll go 0 to 60 over 5.8 seconds or whatever that is. So that's like how an AMS 1000 works, is you're always adding the power as you go. So that's what this can do all built in. It's great. You just enable it and turn it on and it works. And it knows because normally what you need to do is that would be a completely separate box you would need to set up and wire, and then you would need to tell that you need to wire it into your trans brake and hope everything doesn't interfere with that same shit with back feeding and everything else. And what's cool is a super inexpensive computer has it all built in. Like you can just turn it on and off whether or not you want to or whatever. What's neat is it's there whether you want it or not. So if one day you're like, I just want to do burnouts, and then you're like, this car's so fast, I need traction management all of a sudden, like it's there, you just turn it on.
The car I'm dealing with has got an extremely low first gear. You basically use it just to get the second. And it's stick. So I don't know, like that is one area where you're trying to gain traction. I mean,
You could even do, on the launch control settings, I can highlight that quick, there's a timing retard on launch. And I think it's in launch control. Where is that limiter? Timed retard after launch. Now this is like what a guy, 2 or 3 guys with MegaSquirt have Supras, and they're leaving super hard stick shift and first, and it just spins balls when they dump it at like 30 pounds of boost. So they run the timing retard after launch, and they pull a bunch of power out of it with ignition, and then after they come off the launch control and as they're rolling, it ramps ignition back in. So if you enable that, and we go into, I think it's in ignition, or is it going to be under, right here, timed retard after launch. So you go into the launch control settings and then enable it, and then right under launch control, right here, see it's pulling out 10 degrees right when you let go of the launch control or you dump your clutch. It's a TH400 or Glide. You said it has a super like useless first gear.
not even Chevy. It's a Mazda 626 or a Ford Pro.
And it has way too much power in the beginning, and
First gear is extremely
you're struggling with nothing, and then you can hook, but you're bogged.
just like rips the tires.
Yeah.
So you get a
You could enable this on the launch control. It has nothing to do with boost, and you can pull power out of it. So how long does first gear last? Like, yeah, I mean, you could do like a half a second and just yank a bunch of power out of it, and it will really dig the tire. And then when you're in second, it's back to the original timing table.
I mean, essentially, I won't do a burnout. I'll drive through the box. But
You could just dry it. It just
so I can rip the tires.
it's like almost one of those rotary cars. It's just so it hooks. It's all hook.
With no traction.
Yeah, it's steering the boat. You have pillows in the back end and the 40-inch wheelbase, right? But those are all just stuff that's built in. Like that's super easy. You don't even need the boost controller. You can just run flat boost and kill your timing. a second or less in and get the car to hook. And then you know you're already 30, 40 foot out and it can take all the power you can throw at it, but the instant you drop it, it doesn't stick. But that's just another thing where you can turn on ignition retard, yank a whole bunch of power out of it just for the launch. It works good on stick shift cars too. Stick shift cars. Like the one guy has a delay for like first and second because he's like, no matter what, it just blitzes 1 and 2, and I hit third and it's like ready to bog. So he's like, I have it really strong for third and I have ignition retard for like 1 second. He's yanking like 10 degrees over 1 second. And then by the time he's in second or third, it's already like full power and already everything he needs. But in that first, it's like, like you, like it feels like it's in neutral. Dump it and it just spins like crazy.
Yeah, we just try to get to high enough RPM to hit second.
And then, where else were we? I mean, I can look at this thing, see where we're at. I mean, we're pretty good on this inputs and outputs. I could go over that. Basically, in advanced, there's like a programmable on-off inputs, and this is where you can turn on like methanol or a second fuel pump. Or in my buddy's car just recently with that Power Glide, I have this bumping the shift solenoid for the 1-2 shift. So almost anything you can think of, if you're familiar with, if anybody that has like C+ programming or any kind of basic programming knowledge, this is like a giant if then else statement. Like if RPM is this and coolant is above this, turn on inputs or outputs. You can use these to turn on fans on and off, nitrous on and off. There's built-in stuff for fans and nitrous that's more complex, but this is for super simple stuff. Like if we go into, like right here, it's turning on second fuel pump on this car. And you just enable the output and you can rename it to make it easier to understand. Say you just choose a channel, like I just choose map, like that's the map sensor. So this is turning on a certain amount of boost. So very simply, you just enable the output. Power on value is off. It's not, the second fuel pump isn't running. And then active value underneath these conditions is on. And then you say map sensor above 160 kPa, which is like 8-9 pounds. It's going to turn it on. So that's super simple. Like it's just turning on you could turn on methanol with that, or a fuel pump, or something like that. Or like on my buddy's car, we went to nitrous number 2, and we were like, we wanted to shift at a certain RPM. So we did RPM equals 61. I mean, we have it shifting like 6,500, but this is just a rough thing. So in between 6,100, just bumps the shifter and then let's go. So anything, this is where it gets kind of weird and complex because it'll do whatever you want, and it's making it work in practice.
You can also make it 2 variables. And
Yeah,
or.
if or else, whatever, yeah. Yep, so you can say like if this was controlling nitrous, I mean there's a whole nitrous segment that makes it easy to control nitrous, but if you were using, if you're familiar with like a nitrous brain, where it's a TPS and window switch together, so they make sure you're in the throttle and you're above a certain RPM before it activates the nitrous so you don't puddle it and have a giant intake backfire. You can say here like making sure it's above 3,000 RPM, and you would go to like TPS and you would say that this has to be over 75%. And then it would only work when you're over 3,000 and over 75% throttle. So if you're not all the way in the throttle, it won't activate. So these are all just, any questions on the programmable ins and outs?
Can you use vehicle speed things?
Yeah. VSS 1 or 2. Yep. You can have it do weird shit like make the shift on vehicle speed, but his doesn't have a vehicle speed input now on it. So we just did RPM. But yeah, you could say at 75 mile an hour, above 75.
Yeah.
But here's the issue is we ran into is using the above. If it's above 75 miles an hour, it stays on the whole time. And it's a big solenoid. It draws a lot of amperage, and he has it tied into his intercooler pump circuit. So we just wanted it to fire once and then lift. So we gave it a large, like we said, equals to 6,100 with that 100. A hysteresis is like the on-off switching point. That's there because electronics will read such a finite number. If you say coolant temperature at 180, if you say turn on at 180 and off at not 180, it might hit 179.9, 180, and it'll strobe the noid and blow a fuse or burn itself up. Or you don't want your fan just fucking hammering on and off. So what you do is that a hysteresis is like your window. So if you say 6,100 and a 100 thing in between 6,100 and 6,200, it'll fire the noid and then lift at 6210 or whatever. If you say equals 6100 with a 5 RPM window, it might never see it. It might rip right past that. So you have to give it a large enough window that it's consistently shifting but not holding the Noid forever. That's just an instance. Because if you set like your throttle stuff wrong, you might set up your nitrous stuff and think it's okay and lift and it's still spraying while you're decelerating. You're like, oh shit, I didn't put a TPS qualifier in there, you know, stuff like that. That's all stuff too. A lot of it you can do with this too is with the key on, you can hit the throttle and it'll turn on and off. To make sure your inputs and outputs are working, a lot of times, I don't wait till I'm flooring the car to see if the fuel pump's working. I'll say TPS first, 50% throttle, and I'll roll into it and it'll go dink and I'll hear the relay and the pump and everything work before I am hoping it's working at 700 plus horsepower, stuff like that, you know.
Can you play with variable valve timing, like bringing down
Yes.
when it kicks in?
Yeah, it has an entire, you could just turn on, like if it's VTEC, you would obviously use the simple on and off, but it has, I think
Say
it's
I wanna
in,
bring it down from 6 grand to 5 grand because I'm missing.
yeah, I think there is a totally, there's an advanced thing for VVT.
It's in the VVT section.
Where is, in boost slash VVT.
VVT
Yeah.
right there.
There's just, look at the amount of, I mean, the programmable on-offs is fairly simple in relation to all of this. So this is up to you personal preference-wise. That looks pretty daunting if it's just VTEC or something simple. VVT would be like, we're talking about a Coyote motor where you control the
Everything
cam
is filled in there.
degrees. So for like old school Nissan VVT or Toyota or Honda, that stuff is just a solenoid that activates that oil circuit. You're probably better off just enabling it with a simple on and off.
This one does the cam timing and lift.
Cam timing and retard and everything.
You dynoed the car. It was it's a Celica with the Yamaha engine in it.
Okay, yeah, the VVT stuff would be, I've never set up VVT stuff where it's adjustable, but I'm assuming it's duty cycle and it controls an amount of oil pressure and it fills the phaser has an oil pressure galley and the amount of pressure you're putting into it is what is advancing or retarding the cam. And that's one of those things where you probably just need dyno time and just sit there and use every degree point and RPM point and find what's working the best.
Yeah. What happens with that, Matt? Because we did a 6.4
Yeah.
VVT, and the way that it's literally doing a balancing act. You're actually setting the pulse width modulation, so it's you got to know the frequency. And
Yeah, that's a big can of worms for
Yeah,
variable
it's-
valve degreeing.
Yeah, because, and then you literally have to teach it, you have to let it know where its center point is. Because when that cam is running,
They're usually always running retarded to be safe. So you have to advance it to a
depends-
center point.
it-
Yeah.
it depends
At least
on-
with Chevys, if
Yeah.
it's not activated, it's like 8 degrees retarded, just
Yeah.
to be safe.
yeah,
So you have to actually force it to a center point to where you're even tuning negative and positive.
most of the factory stuff, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of the cam manufacturers, because we talked to Comp when we were
That's
out
why
at
they
sea.
lock them all.
They lock
Variables
them
are just
because when they start giving you bigger lifts and durations, people forget that they've got to check piston to valve clearance.
for the whole swing. Because you can move your cam 30 degrees, where at 0, you're not nicking your valve. At
Right.
20 degrees, you're nicking your valves.
You
Because
put
you're
your
pushing
safe-
the valve into the piston
Yeah, with
later or
with
sooner.
the stock pistons, you're safe.
Yeah.
But then you also, like I say, when we did the Coyote, I mean, that whole bottom end is nothing but filled with data. And the strange thing about with the cam timing is when it's literally at its center point, it'll sit there and it'll rock. But once it starts either going into the advanced or retarded phase, it'll literally start to move faster. It's
It has like a weird ramp.
yeah,
Huh.
yeah, it's sort of weird.
That's why a lot of those people are like, it just locks. Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why with this Coyote, because we have to have a good program to send
It's
out.
like it's a loaded question. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just, it's a lot of variables. Yeah. So actual, like if it's Honda or something like that, where it's solenoid activated, I would say just ignore the whole really complex VVT part. But yeah, like he was saying, that's pretty crazy because you need to know like the travel and the center line, and you almost need. Yeah, then you need to tune the whole thing and then hope you need to mechanically know if you're retarded or advanced that much, if you're going to hit your valves and...
You got a choice number out of here?
Yeah.
No, just,
Yeah.
it's open.
And then, yeah, so that's... You can. All the shit's there. You just have to make sure you have everything that has... Either you get a good baseline from somebody, or you put a lot of faith into it, or you figure it all out yourself, or... yeah. He has like 3 cell phones. Just try one. Just try the regular one, the one with no annotations. But yeah, it has all of that in there, and I haven't tuned anything with a VVT yet, but I think it would be cool too. But just make sure I have all the good baselines too.
Thing is just like a little runabout, you know. You're lucky if I can reach 200 horsepower, but
Yeah.
it's a lot of fun on the street, you know what I mean? But there's
I think some of them are motor. Isn't a VR6 use an electric motor? I don't know enough about those. I had one car here on like a Motec with straight alcohol, like 16 injectors, like 900 some horsepower VR6 tube chassis car with a Liberty clutchless. MMI Technologies, that guy?
he had the twin charge.
No, this was just a regular one, but it had, no, not Jeff Smith. This was like some guy that built a rear-wheel drive tube chassis, like 33 by 33 tires, a 9-inch, a Liberty, and running on Motec on alcohol with a shitload of injectors, and they were using variable valve timing. And I think it was just an electric phasing motor. I didn't think it used oil pressure or anything crazy like that, but that would probably be easier because it's probably pulse width modulated and it's not as complex as controlling an oil pneumatic system, because that stuff, like you said, it has a ramp, all sorts of crazy shit, because it's not meant to swing wildly, it's meant to hit and then phase. So difficult, complex answer.
Then like fail-safes and stuff would have to kind of be.
Yeah, your fail-safe is you mechanically biffed something. Yeah, I don't know if you can really, you need like a travel sensor and your cam position talking to each other to make sure the valve isn't far enough down to. You spin it all by hand at every point and make sure it doesn't hit. That's why a lot of people are like, man, they should use VVT and like really complex stuff. And people are like, it works good in like a really low lift stock lobe thing. By the time you're in a, like they say, because we dynoed that Coyote and they're like, why did you lock all that stuff? And we're like, he's going to put cams in anyway. And everybody says the cam is specifically set up to not hit the valve the whole time. And if you move that duration or point or opening or closing point, you hit it.
You need
So.
to make sure that you've got,
That's why they're like, install this pin and lock the shit out of everything.
that's why they do it.
But what were we with? We do like, I know we talked somewhat about like dwell and stuff like that. Should I mean, I can just bring the car in and we can talk about like race gas, fuel, boost reference, pumps, lines, like all that stuff that people have a lot of questions about. That's more of like a tuning thing than a MegaSquirt thing. I don't know if,
I've got a MegaSquirt question. I know it doesn't have a built-in data log, but is there any way to data log if you have the laptop in the car?
we tried that. Does that thing only work for MS1? Remember that pocket, that
Yeah,
weird
that was
thing?
just for the MS1.
Yeah, never mind then. There is no onboard solution. It needs a laptop. That's what's another cool thing about the Gold Box is like my buddy's Notch. I set it at whenever he goes over 55% throttle to make internal data logs, and that's been like, he's like, it's doing something funny here and whatever, and I'm like, go in, pull the logs and email them to me, and that's when I was like, because he doesn't have to think about it at all. He just floors the car down the track,
Yep.
and then I look at his logs and he has within 1% fuel trim, and I'm like, oh, no one had to think about it or hit the brakes and rocket the laptop or connect it or make sure it's on or.
And then just have an SD card, or is there actually
It's SD.
memory? Yeah.
Yeah, it uses an SD card, so the car can explode and you can pull the SD card, and you still have. You're like, I don't care if my car burns to the ground, but I need that tuning data when I build my next one.
Yeah, we set ours to always on.
Yeah,
And when he
if
comes
it's
back
if
from
it's a
the road-
dedicated race car,
Yeah.
you can set it so that when the ECU is on, it's making a log. So key on, key off is a new log every time. And on my friend, since he drives it a lot, we really only ever want to look when he's over. We set it at 55% throttle. So whenever he hits it on the anti-lag or the brake or passes someone in traffic, we know what it did. And I mean, what?
Can you give a rundown of like how you can
The SD card stuff?
convert the SD to?
Oh, it does it. Yeah, it does it automatically. basically you have to go into the whole SD card data logging thing here. And when you connect live, it enables this browse import thing because it basically turns into like when you plug a USB drive into your computer and it shows it, you need to have it plugged in and it basically opens. It'll open a thing and then sit there and load the SD card and show the files. And from there, if you just click download, the Tuner Studio software automatically converts it and puts it as a data log in the data logs folder for that project. It's like, boom. It's so nice.
So you have them all in there. You throw your laptop on and download.
Yeah, literally, like if he floored it 55 times, we would see since we cleared it last. I mean, if you put even a small memory, the data logs take up no space at all. So if you could have thousands of logs on there. So every now and then you want to go in and like delete them, pull whatever's important and delete it because you're going to have so many. I mean, what it does is it'll just make 59, 60, 61, and it's like a bunch of digits. So it'll take a long time. You would never be able to fill it.
Those are all like sendable, like you're saying, email to you.
Yeah, it's MSL, MegaSquirt log file, and it's super easy. It opens right up in Megalog Viewer. You can literally take the car out, floor it, not think about it, open them, use VE Analyze, reconnect, hit save. It'll load live into the car when it's running and hit and go clear SD card. And yeah, it's all really that easy.
You might want to go into and show them how to select. There's various parameters that it.
Oh yeah, yep. What I mean, if you
Right
use
here
one of
at
my
the
bass
bottom.
tunes,
Right at the bottom.
yeah, I think it's the easiest. Right here is where your available data log fields and then selected. I have a pretty good amount here. I can see pretty much everything I want to see. Some of it, obviously you don't really need to look at, like if you're not using MAF and everything else, but you want to make sure it's logging. Obviously you're choosing what you want to see is on the right side here, or else it won't data log that channel. It's just, you can do that so you just don't get a lot of garbage in the file. When you do a data log with the laptop connected, it's data logging every channel it's physically capable of. So, and then the other thing is here, I went through a lot of time choosing like the size limits and the sample intervals and frames per second. That's like the best mix of a good amount of data and not useless, because you could change this sample interval and make it 1,000 frames a second of data. So every second you have 1,000 data points. And if you look at a log like that, you're like, this is useless. I don't even know what's going on, because it's a minuscule time frame. Everything's straight, basically. You don't see anything moving because it's so vast. It's ridiculous. It's like looking at the universe. Yeah, you're like, which? Yeah, so 20 frames a second I mean, that's 20 data points a second. So that's plenty of data, especially even for drag racing. So if it was like a rally car or something, you could even make the data logs smaller with less data points. You could do like 1 data point per second, because you're looking at a 45-minute race and you don't want to look through a file that's endlessly scrolling. You want to look at a 45-minute window and a much smaller. So you can change that stuff. But as far as drag racing and what I'm most comfortable with is that 20 frames a second. And
Regarding inputs, let's say I wanted to have a temperature going more in the intercooler coming out, how would you set it up with a data log that records that?
What you would do is you'd have to go into like, we didn't cover generic sensors. I did want to do that anyway. But this is where like you could choose like one of your input wires, like a 0 to 5 volt sensor or a temperature sensor. And this is where you would choose like which one is it coming in on.
Okay.
And then you could give it a name, so that the name here is just in other fields, you're going to see that oil pressure name.
Right.
And then here is where you would just put in your values, like same as map coolant, manifold temp, or if it's a GM calibration.
Okay.
And then you enter in, a lot of times you're not going to get these values from the manufacturer of the sensor, which is nice when you can say same as MAT, like same as manifold absolute temperature. Because a coolant sensor and a temperature sensor, air temperature and coolant sensor are the same sensor. One's open element, one's closed element, but they use the same cal. So if you're going to do and then you can name it like post. The other one is just IAT no matter what. I don't think you can really rename it to pre and post, like intercooler and after intercooler kind of name. One of them is always just going to be manifold temp, and the other one's going to be whatever you name this one.
Okay.
And then that's what you would do is, if you can't get the data, you're going to have to mess with these data points until it makes sense, or you're going to have to artificially make it those. Like if it's a map sensor, you can hook it up to a compressor regulator. Like if it's a 30-pound thing, you can turn it in between those points and measure the amounts and give it the.
And calibrate
Yeah, yeah, you just have to approximate it. And some of them suck at like the bottom, but they work great in the hole. Like I noticed oil pressure sensors from GM, like they show weird results under close to 1 pound. And then 5 to 100, it's dead on. But when you key on, it looks like shit sometimes. And you just have to live with it. It's one of those, if you're OCD, you're gonna have a bad day.
You don't show anything on the gauge in a stock vehicle under 20 or 30 pounds.
What's that?
The GM oil pressures.
Yeah, they show obscure numbers under a certain amount. I think it's meant because it's supposed to, under a certain amount, it's supposed to like turn on a warning or something. So they like crop whatever it is at the end. So it shows like, if it's under whatever, it's like failed basically. But, and then if you're data logging right to the laptop, it's gonna show whatever you type that in, like IAT number 2. And then on SD card, you're gonna have to add it in here, like there's gonna be sensor, yeah, here. We were in that thing for like, see where I named oil pressure and boost dial?
Right.
It would be IAT2, and you just add that to the SD card, and then it would be grabbing the post. And there's a lot of times where I'm like, I wish I had a map sensor on my back pressure. I wish I had a map sensor. I wish I had 3 temperature things to see efficiency, and I just never got to wiring all those or just don't care. Too busy flooring it. But I think that's it for programmable in and outs and generic PWM and all sorts of weird shit. But this is where like speed sensors go in. You just choose the inputs. And that's where I was saying to you, like change the tire height, you know, whether it's a wheel or a drive shaft or pulses, and then you just enter all the info until it shows up right. And that's stuff that you can look, like I can watch here and I can see vehicle speed 1 and 2. And if they're not matching, I'm like, oh, the height's different. You just change the tire height. Or obviously like my 1-tooth screwdriver thing is pretty low resolution. So under 20 miles an hour, it's erratic. And then over that, it smooths out because it's hitting it enough that it can figure out. But that's why, like a transmission speed sensor is like 40 teeth. So like when I drive, it says like 0.11 miles an hour because it's that kind of resolution. And my screwdriver's like 5, 0, 20. Yeah, it's like, I don't really know. Stop. And when you're turning the wheel, all of a sudden it's speeding up and slowing down too, so it screws it up. But all right.
Got another question, Matt.
Yes.
All right, I just got one of the gold boxes. I got the car hooked up. I've got your basic tune and the car won't start. How do you troubleshoot that?
Basically, you want to make sure you're live, like in your sensor data is working. Like I would move my TPS first to make sure I'm actually connected, because sometimes it might look like you're connected. Say you go into designer mode here. We're not connected to anything. If you go into designer mode, it lights up like this when you're connected. So sometimes you're not really connected. The car won't start. The first thing you want to do is like make sure you're actually seeing RPM. If you're seeing RPM, that's most of the battle. Is sometimes people plug in the cam and crank sensors differently, or if it depends on if they wired it themselves.
Was this a plug-and-play harness?
What's that?
Was that a plug-and-play?
Is it like a theory or just a?
Yeah, theory. Right now I
Okay.
have
If you have RPM, that's most of it. And then what you're going to want to do is move your fueling around. And commonly we find like fuel pump's not turning on, fuel pressure issues, fuel pressure is too high, too low, non-existent, other strange stuff like that. Check your fuses. Sometimes you can have, everything's fine in the ECU, and you might have done something funny like plugging in spark stuff and blown the fuse for the spark or the fuel. Everything's fine, but the injectors don't have power. So that stuff, like those are like the 5 main things. Just because everything seems right, and then you check and you're like, stupid injector fuse is blown. But everything else was fine, so just check all that stuff first.
Well, will this let you know that there's not getting an injector bolt?
It's not going to be able to tell. No, there's no feedback, yeah. So a couple times, even I've done it, I can't tell you because I do the firmware stuff. I change my firmware a lot. They tell you to pull the fuses to flash firmware because when you're flashing firmware, the injector and coil inputs and outputs don't have instructions. And if you have, GM coils, you have to try really hard to hurt them because they have built-in protection. But a coil that's dumb, if you're flashing the computer and it decides to send garbage to the coil and strobe it 160 times a second, it can burn the coil. So they tell you to pull all the fuses except for the computer to just flash the computer. And then once there's instructions in, put the fuses back in. And many times I have pulled the spark and fuel fuses flash the computer and go to start it, and I'm like, what the fuck? This won't run. And I get so mad, and then I find fuses on the seat.
Right.
And I changed my entire tune because the car wouldn't run.
Right. Okay.
And then I plug the things in and it starts fucked up because I changed my tune for no reason. Yeah, so stuff like that. That's the checklist.
I wired
Fuses.
I wired the thing, just wanted to feel it out the first time. I did it all right, and it was like garbage half just to make sure it ran. And I pulled it back apart, and I went to like lube it, do it all nice. And what I did is, in the injectors, like I cut pieces just to like make links.
Yeah.
I wired it color to color on the injectors, and that still ran. It ran like horrible.
Yeah.
And I was like for like 2 days, I was doing like kind of the same thing, and then I was just like, it kind of hit me in the back of the head. It's kind of those things you just gotta be really aware, because like it doesn't really just tell you like, hey, you wired shit backwards.
Yeah, it's not going to tell you, yeah. Especially if it's a solenoid, like an injector. There's no feedback. That's why, like, it's funny, you can take over injectors with MegaSquirt on factory cars, because they almost have no feedback other than checking the O2 sensors. So you can run one of those, and as long as the fuel stuff is close enough, it's never going to know. Because it's like, I'm firing injectors. The only reason it knows there's an injector problem is when O2 data is bad. So that's one of the only things there's no. A lot of sensors you can unplug, and it's like, yo, your sensor's unplugged. You can unplug injectors, and the car's like, why is your fuel a mess? It doesn't know. All right, I can pull my truck in, and we can mess with that. Does that sound good? This place is going to smell like candy, and the exhaust comes out like here-ish, so we'll just make sure it doesn't blow anything over. I mean, what I'm going to show first is like the acceleration enrichment, how it looks live. So, like I said, no one's really going to be able to probably hear me at all. But what I want to do is fire it up, show how it's working, and then I'll skew it so it works like shit, and you'll see what I mean about the numbers look okay, but the stumble is happening kind of bullshit. And then I'll fix it again, and then, we'll go from there. But I'll try to run it until everyone's eyes are pink, and then shut it off and go back and forth kind of thing, and we'll figure everything out. At least it's not pump gas. That stuff, it smells so terrible. That was my trans cooler. All right. And like I said, like the first time you connect, you want to make sure like your coolant temp, and you can see up here where it says ethanol percentage. It even says fuel temperature, air temp, like all that stuff makes sense. Trans temp 74, like my throttle position's working. You want to make sure that stuff's working before you try. But actually, I want to warm it up a little bit, so it's a little cold. Does it smell in here yet?
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, I was like, I'm probably killing them.
So good.
But yeah, smells good. But you can see how like when you just blip it a little bit, it moves a little bit up that scale, and then it's funny. This car, it sounds funny sometimes because that downpipe is so short, but it feels fine. But then you can see where I screw up the fueling line, and it's like like it just feels like trash. And then also I haven't really touched them. They're not that great. It's not as good as it was with the 80s. The 160s definitely have a different range for sure, and I have to work on that. But with my 80s, I could be like, whoo, and it would be like 5K, no problem. So we'll mess around with it a little bit of work. But basically there's like a bunch of different Excel enrichment settings, and you can change it from time-based or that Excel pump feature. And I think the time-based is a little bit more complex. That's where you get a little bit more options here. You can mess around with more things. And basically, let's do the auto scale here. See the whole scale. What happens is this is like the limit of where that TPS Excel comes on. And I think you can see when I move this aside, there's a TPS Excel little qualifier down there. That'll blink green when it's turning on the TPS Excel. And basically, you need to find a happy medium of when that's turning on and you're getting into the throttle. Because sometimes you think it's turning on too soon. You just don't want it to happen while you're like cruising on the highway, like turning on and off, because your fuel will just keep getting rich for no reason. But sometimes that has to be a little bit closer to like almost happening before you want it to get a clean hit out of it. And then, because some of the cars, it's funny, like you can delay that like 50, 100 or whatever, and they're fine. But some of them really like it to be choked down quite a bit. Then there's options for like how much enrichment, like less enrichment below a certain RPM or no enrichment above a certain amount. Because most of the time a car like this if you're above 5,000 RPM and you're pedaling or doing a burnout or holding it or pushing in and out and it's just trying to accelerate, it doesn't need any enrichment because it's already so far into an enrichment map like the throttle. The amount of throttle you're moving from like 100 to 80 is basically insignificant. So it doesn't really need anything. Most of what you're doing is when it's shut to when it's open, that initial hit of air is where it's really, you get the feel and everything else.
Trying to compensate for the rush of air, right?
Yeah, you're just, I mean, the manifold has like vacuum and it's doing its own. If you ever watch that video on YouTube where the guy puts his finger in that big block car when it's on the engine dyno, holy shit, that's crazy. You can see like the engine actually has pulses in the intake. The intake is actually pulsing, even if it's all motor, just from the valves opening and closing everywhere. The guy puts his finger in the thing and it looks like a wet noodle. And he's like, I'm trying my heart. He's like, I thought I was gonna break my finger off. Like, he's like, I don't advise you doing that, but I wanted to see. He's like, we know what the measuring equipment says, but when you see someone's finger in there, like, it looks like a piece of fabric, you're like, holy shit. So like all sorts of weird resonance is happening, and it's under vacuum, and when you crack that thing, it's losing, there's all sorts of weird pressure changes, and you're trying to combat all of that, and like I said, a lot of times you need to not worry about the number at all, and just make it do what you want. And then sometimes you'll notice when you tap it, you get some fuel, but then it goes lean again. What you need to do is go down to like the acceleration time, like the time and taper, or how much it's going in, and adjust all of that too. And then obviously MS3 Micro does not have this, but you can blend, like I was saying, like if you have an individual throttle body car or some other crazy stuff, you can give it a percentage of using the one table or using the other table, and if you need to. And that right there is just a slider bar between blending a percentage of this one or the other one. Any other like questions with like, do you want to see how the fuel table goes up and down, or? I'm unsure at this point. Like, it's hard to, I can't really talk over that damn thing. No way. But what is on the, let me look at the sheet. Where are we at? I think we covered so much of it, like wastegate placement and stuff like that. I can do a poll quick and we can review like the log and show some other stuff. Or we can sit here and mess with my acceleration enrichment there until everyone's sick.
I know, like, before I had messed with anything, it was really cool to see like the actual movement of the dot, like relevant to like pressure and like as far as like boost, positive pressure, and so on. And so
Yeah,
forth,
like on the
how it
fuel
moves
table,
through
watching it live, yeah, and
Right.
understanding where it's moving on the plot.
Or you could
Like
do
it's
that-
always pretty much sweeping up into the high boost, high load range.
Well, like the first couple times I was really playing with it, I just pulled it with fuel and then ignition just to see, because it was kind of cool to see like, oh wow, you can literally go and change like how literal it is.
Yeah, what I will do is, yeah, hand that over. I'll make a new thing, so if I screw up a lot, I don't screw myself. Again, with making sure you're backed up. Where did I call it? Tuner class?
Tuner class?
Yeah, I'm gonna delete that. I'm gonna make a new one. Look at an aluminum motor tune in there. But I'll make a new one. One test. That'll be easy to find. We'll open this guy up. And I mean, I can show quick, like, as I'm just cruising around, like how it's moving around the fuel table. I want people want to see that. I don't know if a bunch of you mess with it already and pretty much have a handle on that, or I'm kind of confused where to go next for the. What's that?
This is all new.
Oh, it's all totally new? Okay, yeah, that's what I want to know, is like if it's anything you've seen, or. What I'll do is like I'll fire the car and I'll open the fuel table and show you like how it's moving around the fuel table, and I can actually go in there and like I showed before, when I start it and go in, what I'll do is when it's idling good, I'll go up into here and I'll take out like a whole shitload. I'll screw this up bad, and then I'll turn on, like I'll try to accelerate, and you'll see how it's going lean and it won't even want to drive. And then I can go in and keep adding it until it is driving good, and then like we'll see how fumey it is, and then I'll change it to where I'll turn on auto tune and show you when I roll in how auto tune starts fixing it for you. Once you see how that works and how you make it work, like it's a big like, whoa, like I can make it do that for me. Like I don't have to sit and try not to rear end people. Like I can just drive, and as it's cleaning itself, I know it's working better. You know, just take your time and try not to, you're like, I can't wait to make 40 pounds of boost, but you know, you might hurt it before you get out of your driveway kind of thing. What I'll do is I'll fire it up and I'll screw up the middle of my fuel table and show like what it does, like it just wants to be a piece of shit. Do you see it? Still working? Still good? But you can see like how I'm very easy there. I added like, I can't remember what I did, like 20%, and you roll into it and it was just way too much. But very quickly, on very easy there, it made quick work of that middle table where it's kind of dicked up. And as long as everything is good, I mean, very easily there, it was completely drivable. It's almost totally safe. Like, and you can see how, you know, once you roll into it and boost a bunch of times, it will clean that up so fast. Like, I've had to roll into it like 3 times and it was mint. And you can see where, yep, you can see where it says it was 91 and now it's 85. And it only hit like, it only got 4 points of data, you know, and it made a quick change. So that's the issue with the very easy thing is one of those things where you're like, I need to drive it around the block and check my trans fluid and make sure everything isn't a mess. And then as you get farther and farther and everything is pretty good, that's when you need to ease up on that and make it harder for it to make significant change. But like I said, when you're rolling into boost anyway, you want to make sure there's too much. It's fine if you roll into it and it's like it's just choking on fuel, just lift. It'll make the changes, roll into it again. You definitely don't want to take out too much and learn a hard lesson. Like, but even on very easy, it doesn't seem to, it'll take a few hits for it to trim too much to be dangerous, but you just want to make sure you have that clear amount of overhead, way too much.
Also the filter too, like you were showing, like if it's not over 160.
When I was rolling into it, I was like, I don't think it's warm enough, and then as soon I let it go to 161, I was gonna change it, but then I figured I'd see when it clears, and then.
Is there anything else you usually like to do there, like, or do you usually leave this stock, like I said, like where it's like hitting your idle, or do you know what I mean, like when you're sitting there?
With MS3, it doesn't seem to have, like, it doesn't screw up the idle. Some of the times I let it trim around idle. What you'll notice is you might have auto tune on, and cruise, boost, everything is good, and your idle keeps getting screwed up. Set it like 1500. Just stop letting it screw up your idle. Yeah.
Where do you set that?
Right here, minimum RPM. Yeah. I have it below idle here, so it'll trim the whole thing for me. And then what you need to look at too is when you were driving around, you see how we have, well, I'll go to something easier to look at. When we go into the fuel table now, we have highs and lows pretty messy all over the place. So you can see how this is like fairly transitioned well, but now we have an 80, a 100, and a 90. You want to make sure you hit, it made changes up around that 90 zone. You don't really want to clean that up. You always want to overdo it. So you would go into this cell, you know, you could just go down here and interpolate the higher amount just to make sure you have too much. And then keep trimming as you get there. And once you're sure, try to make all these solid numbers because it's going to screw you up. Like this hump here, like now if we do 3D view, it's still not that bad. I'd have to really murder this, but when you mess with it that much and you're not paying attention, and what's funny is it's interpolating at those edges, so if you get close to them, all sort weird shit will happen, and it's because like one little guy is 80 over here, and it's not really close to what you're doing. Like what you'll notice is the idle and everything else is cleaned up, and then down here a little bit below idle or a little bit off idle is a mess. See, like I will have to drive around and mess with these load cells before I really, because I just put these 160s in like yesterday. So I would straighten all these out before I really mess with my Excel table a lot, because a lot of funny business you might be having is because this isn't uniform. So, I mean, that probably connects a lot of dots watching that thing work on its own. Yeah, I mean, it's really, the first time you do that, micro isn't as fast. MS3 is like stupid. You're like, woo, woo, and it's fixed. Like I could screw it all. Like what we might do is I'll just really make it bad and we'll see how fast it can fix it. As long as everybody has a gas mask, you know. But you can see how easy it is to just drive around and roll into it and have it clean itself up. As long as your closed loop settings and the stuff you're giving it and the information from the wideband is right, it's a breeze to really straighten it out. But like I said, if you're rolling into it and you're hitting 14 pounds of boost and you're never clearing up this section here, you got to go back here and trim it out a little bit, you know, and make sure it's nice and smooth. Otherwise, you're going to run into weird.
Auto-tune's only available on the purchase version, right?
Correct. Yeah, the live thing like that. Yep. And with that said, you can have a pretty garbage-looking table on a fast car, too. So, I mean, you don't have to chase some sort of ideal. Because there's plenty of cars like you'll have, here's an interesting fact, you'll see something funny, like with my truck when I was running out of fuel pump and injector, you'll see like everything's gradual, like 80, 100, 9. You'll see all of a sudden like some large numbers start showing up, and no matter what, you can't get fuel in. We call that runaway duty cycle. You just can't get it in. You have enough injector probably, but not enough pump. Like you'll see, the numbers should look pretty normal, other than I was explaining, some people were listening, but if you have a really big fuel pump, like a MagnaFuel 4303, the rising rate system, if you have a rising rate system hooked up, just the fuel pressure rising is enough to compensate for the fuel. So from 6 pounds to 14 pounds of boost, you'll have the same fuel numbers. Normally that would cause some concern, but when you know you have a big ass fuel pump in the rising rate system, just the pressure rise is compensating. Like I said, my buddy Ackerman's car, it says 75 in here, and it says 75 in here, and it makes 150 extra horsepower between those numbers, but it has the same amount of fuel. So all it means is the injector's opening the same amount, and that the extra fuel pressure is compensating for all that extra horsepower. Pretty crazy, but
That's a modern version of an FMU or something?
exactly. Like the numbers are staying the same, but more fuel is going in. So
So this is the first time I heard of a pump that actually does the job.
yeah, well, it's
the regular.
it's just that the pump is so overkill that just that little bit of fuel pressure is putting in that much more flow. You're usually not going to see that unless sometimes people have a mechanical fuel pump. So when RPM is coming up, fuel flow is multiplying. So they'll actually have smaller fuel numbers at high RPM. It's because the pump is cranking out like 200 pounds of fuel pressure, and it's flowing like gallons and gallons a second. So you actually have to open the injector less because the fuel amount is exceeding your demand for the injector.
So you could technically use a smaller injector.
Yeah, but normally if you see funny numbers on most applications, unless you have like a mechanical fuel pump methanol car or some other crazy weird shit, or like I said, couple people have a pretty fast car. I have a 4303, like Mark's notchback. The numbers were all very low. Like I think our maximum number was like a 102, and that car made over 1,000 horsepower. But the fuel numbers looked low, but it's just because the pump was just a beast, and it was on a rising rate system. And that's one of those pumps where, 20 more pounds of fuel pressure increases the flow exponentially. So now like an in-tank pump like this, the more pressure you give it, the flow actually drops off. So that's why like on a lot of these systems, I take this is a 1-to-1 system from the factory, and the vacuum pulls some pressure out, but I just take it off because on 20 pounds of boost, you're sacrificing quite a bit of flow.
So Mike and Mike are gonna roll.
Okay.
They got some other things to get to. So
Got another engagement.
All right, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yep.
you guys have any other questions for them? Get in touch with
Anything
them.
else we can answer yet before we go?
Yes and no. You didn't get a shirt. Was there any extra one except those two?
Hopefully you guys found this informative.
Yeah, that's what my wife calls them, knowledge bombs. She'll ask me something sometime, and I'll talk about it, and she'll ask me 2 questions, and I'll go like
What's that?
overboard, and she's like,
Extra one?
my cup is full, just everything else is just not going in, stop.
Yeah, it's for another guy, but it's good for him. Obviously.
Yeah, I think a lot of the manufacturer classes, I end up with the same feeling every time. Like, oh, my brain hurts. But tomorrow's
Yeah.
so awesome.
It seems like I can always do that. I can always get to a point where someone's like, stop, just stop. I'm done now. I'm inundated. Yep,
Thanks, man.
no problem. At least that's always a positive comment when people are like, I can't retain. I learned so much I can't retain it. Well, good and bad, but at least you didn't learn nothing, you know. I feel bad if you're like, I wish I could have learned more. But if you're like, I learned so much about wastegates, I know less now. I'll be like, okay, that's good and bad.
It's tough with something like this. I mean, you have a finite amount of time. You know, no one's gonna
Yeah,
sit
it's
down
trying to
for
cram what people
3
ask.
days in a week or whatever. We
Yeah.
come back and get it. It's so everyone learns different. So you're gonna get something out of it. The first
Some guy's asking to buy your Camaro. It's normal stuff going on. But but yeah, I mean, what do you want to do? Like more? You want to see more stuff of the car working,
We can
or
go through more settings that you guys want to implement that's already done with his truck, or how
at
we
least
put
stuff
up
you want to see work in
traction or
practice?
whatever he put on there.
Yeah, I mean traction control not on the dyno, but
Well, yeah, I'm just saying you can actually go through and show.
yeah, I
a
can
lot of
show
things.
you what the traction control looks like, like on my gear and these, I mean, the tunes are available to get then, and you can see where like on mine the vehicle speed sensor is not in the MegaSquirt 3, it's in the transmission controller from the tail shaft speed sensor. So there's a whole bunch of weird fuckery going on because it's actually getting the vehicle speed input. See where it says CAN VSS? It's not an actual sensor, it's getting it over CAN. So then you're giving it the sensors, like this is getting CAN gear and everything else. It's not an actual sensor. So it's inputting the mile an hour from the TCU over CAN. So it's not a direct vehicle speed sensor. But vehicle speed sensor number 2 is the screwdriver in the front wheel.
Okay, so just those two against each other to create
Yes,
traction.
a percentage of slip is equaling a reaction. But basically this is how the 2 wheel speed sensors go in. And then that's how you set like wheel speed height right here and like one tooth. If you have a, I mean, it's very simple stuff like the wheel speed sensor might have 5 teeth. So you say 5 teeth, everything else. But then you would go into, once you have 2 speed sensors, you can go into, well, let me go into the traction control settings. And then this is where you can implement like, most commonly what people are going to do is 2 vehicle speed sensors. So that's vehicle speed slip. It needs to see 2 to see a percentage that they're off to then implement a strategy by percentage of how far it's off. So you can set it up also to do like what's called perfect run RPM, or switched input. Switched input would be if you have an external traction control device and it says you're slipping, it's going to do pulsed inputs. That's what's going to be external input. Perfect run is going to be, you're going to build like a sheet over like how fast the car is going to accelerate. And you're going to give it like, it's going to go a certain vehicle speed over a certain amount of time. And if it's exceeding that, if you say 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, if it tries to do 0 to 60 in 1, it knows it's spinning. But it's like an acceleration limit. It's interesting, but not a lot of people use that because there's way too many variables.
You can like slow yourself down. Like,
If the car's real fast, it's going slow. Yeah, so it's difficult. So realistically, what a lot of people are doing is vehicle slip. Because you're always going to have the rear tires accelerating is pushing the car, so it's always going to slip a little bit. So you give it the percentage, like slip threshold. I have it at 4% because it's a street tire car, like a slick, or like folding the tire and everything else and getting really good traction. You might see a decent amount of slip. You have to data log it all and look at it. Like I know the car wasn't spinning a drop, and I saw 5-8% slip. It's just the tire height change and some other weird factors of growth or squat or other strange things. So that's where you need to set your threshold. And then you have like 6 strategies, 6. And in here is where you can pull amount of spark. So as slip comes up, it's gonna ride just like when I hit the throttle, that little bar guy is gonna come across and ride this spark retarder. So depending on how bad it's slipping, it's going to go up this chart, say, look at this, slip, like 5% slip over that amount of time. It's going to pull 3 degrees. So the more it slips, the more ignition it's pulling on this slope. So the more it slips, the more power it's yanking out. And then what's cool is when it's pulling power out, the slip starts going down, so it rides the scope back down and starts putting the timing right back in. So it's like a nice little, it works all on its own. I mean, I posted those videos where I stomp it, and I posted some data logs that look confusing, but maybe not after today, where rear wheel speed spikes away from front wheel speed, ignition retard comes up at the same time, rear wheel speed slows down and matches, and then it takes off like nothing happened. And you had your foot to the floor, full boost the whole time, and it figured out your traction for you. So other things you can do is you can limit, like you can spark cut the motor, which doesn't work that great, and it's kind of hell on your timing chains and rockers and other mechanical things. It's doing like a rolling cut while you're trying to accelerate. It's constantly stopping and starting the motor and just beating the chains and everything else. If you're running a lot of boost through a boost controller, you can have it pull boost with you can pull boost duty cycle as it slips, or you can do a combination like, say you said don't do any spark retard until like 25% slip, like very bad, and pull boost up to 25%. You can make them work together, and whatever works best. Usually it's just riding the spark retard is what everybody tells me makes the car the fastest, because it's almost seamless. Like when I hit my car from like second gear there, on the video you can hear like it just lays over a little bit and then just keeps on going. If you knock boost out of it, you may have trouble recover. It all depends on the setup. Like if it's a little turbo, like if it's your Evo, you know it's going to recover like bang. Like it's lit. It's over 25 pounds, like part throttle. It has too much boost all the time. So cutting boost out of it might be an effective way, but as my buddies like that race a lot of no prep stuff are like the spark, just let it ride the spark retard. Shit, if it submarines ignition into like negatives, it's because it was spinning too much. It's not because you should limit, because you may go in here and give it like 2 degrees over a significant amount of slip, and it just blows the tire no matter what. It's just not pulling enough. So you almost need to do logs and see the percentage it's pulling and scale all of it appropriately. Like I was saying with the TPS, where you see if it's pinning the top of the chart, you need to keep moving the chart until you can't pin it anymore, and then fill everything in between.
So it's starting to get to an issue where, like, now, are you driving the car, or are you, like, letting traction control do its job? You know what I mean? Like, say you're, like, doing a no prep deal, you bury it, it does start slipping, and the ECU's not making up for it, you pedal, are you screwed by then, or?
You know, I haven't done enough of that to know, but with the settings I have in there that I totally guessed at, would only allow like a 10-mile-an-hour rear wheel speed on top of the front wheel speed. So it would spin just enough to maybe step out a little, but I could tell if it wanted to step out way, like if I would forget it's not on and hit it, and it was like, I'm like, it's not working if I'm staring at the guardrail. So you can usually lift in time. Other people were saying like, if you're getting totally shit traction, you run into an issue where you're running almost zero timing and you're like baking your exhaust valves, but that's like part of it. You know, you're accepting that, like when you're using a lot of anti-lag, you're accepting that you are beating the shit out of your turbine and your motor. I mean, when you're running negative timing on the anti-lag, basically how that works, I don't know if everyone's familiar, it's running such a retarded ignition event that the exhaust valve is open and the mixture hasn't even been ignited. The exhaust valve is like down in the cylinder, and it's like, and it fires all of that fuel and air, and it like torches the exhaust valve and throws dynamite into the exhaust. And that's how it creates artificial load to spin the turbo. So that's how it doesn't wait for the combustion. The motor is, it puts the valve, basically how the valve cools off is by touching the cylinder head. So when you're exposing the entire valve and then setting off a 1400 degree flame front, you can pit them and burn them, tulip them and very easily. Yeah, it's you're accepting that as a fate. Well, your transmission is lava before that happens in a drag race event. Yeah, if you look at trans temps, like we data log trans temps on Mark's car, it'll go up 100 degrees in 3 seconds, like even faster than that sometimes. Yeah, I wish I did not know how hot that trans was many times. I'm like, I'd be better off not knowing, because we didn't have a problem and I was worried about it all day, like 300 degrees in a couple seconds, like, and then you make a pass. Not 300 at the end of the track. Yeah. Yep. Come up, 160 degrees, foot brake, 180, 200, anti-lag, 260, 290, launch. Yeah, you're like, I don't want to know. I don't fucking want to know that. Really hot. That's why people are like, you ever tune with EGT? And I'm like, no. I don't want to know any more than I know. I know too much. Like you can put a pressure transducer on your radiator and you can tell if you're nicking your head gasket because you'll see pressure spikes in your water jacket through a map sensor on your coolant side. Other times you're like, I don't know, I don't care. Like it never banana peels my rad hose, so I don't give a fuck. You know, it has coolant in it, it doesn't smell like combustion, I'm fine. So it's whatever you want to do. You want to know a lot and be worried, or sometimes you're better off not knowing, like we always say.
No gauge feel, or
Yeah.
just like whatever?
Yeah, it's not puking out of the vent, so it's not hot enough. It's fine. And then like what I have like, I can show you how my boost dial works. Under boost control settings, it's set to open loop. And then here's like another table switching thing, which is a cool feature, because you can blend tables in MS3, not just switch tables. So right here, it's turning on what's called blend curve 6. It enables, in the table thing, boost 1 and 2. And then you go into boost table 1 and 2. So you set, wrong one. So here is a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 50. And on the input, which is sensor number 2, which is the 5-volt dial, it's transitioning between 0 and 50. So it's that simple. And then, like I said to people, they're like, can you control your amount of boost based on ethanol content? Yeah, you go right in here and you go into the flex fuel sensor instead of the dial. Flex percentage. So right now, the ethanol percentage is dictating how much boost goes in the car if you set up the tables to do so. And then, under flex fuel settings, if you just want to add ignition, which I'm not a huge fan. You can't, in my opinion, you can't just put in E85 and add 10 degrees. You're asking for trouble. You can do that here though, and add timing addition at like 100% alcohol content. You can type in 10. So at E70, it's adding 7 degrees. If you look at it that way.
Have you seen any horsepower increase with 7 degrees of timing over gas?
What, from gas straight to E? Well, I've never really done those tests, but it depends. I'll just push a car till it's making good solid gain. Like a setup like this might pick up 25 horsepower per degree to the tire, and then you're going to hit a point where it makes 10, and the next one's going to be 5, and the next 3 are going to be ringlands. So it's like clockwork. So it's going to make really healthy power, and if it's not, usually if a car makes really good power, we'll pull one instead of even adding one. And then it'll make the same power. We're like, oh, we're already over. Or we'll pull a plug and it'll be chasing the strap, and we're like, oh, that's no good. Because a lot of cars, like my buddy's Notch, you would expect it to make more power if you just threw ignition in, but it's a high back pressure setup. It's getting a lot of exhaust volume it can't remove. We found in setups like that, you can keep pulling timing, because it can't get the gas out anyway, so advancing the curve is fruitless. So like a pull like that, like almost all the cars they love like to start at that 14 pounds, 14 degrees range. His like 14 and 14, you can pull 2 degrees, it makes the same power, because it's just backing up so bad. It's not even at a good, like a decent flowing level. Like a low back pressure setup, you might be able to go 14, 16. But you know, it's hard to tell people how to manage that without a dyno, or at least making back-to-back fairly close. You have a consistent driver car and everything, and you see it keeps picking up mile an hour like crazy or something. And then you can, obviously mile an hour is horsepower, so if you just keep picking up mile an hour, you can keep going. But I always like to double check it, so I always do it's nice to see track time, dyno number, and ignition all looking appropriate.
Have you gotten into like running on E? Is it similar to meth as far as checking torque?
It's really clean. Ethanol is really hard to read the plug. It's like the alcohol burns.
Just comes out as
Gas is like leaves this dark white line on it's like blackish on the strap, and then a nice clean, like I posted a bunch of pictures in that spark plug thing if you look at, and it has like a checkered dot on a gas car. Like you're like, bam, it's there. And ethanol, you're kind of like, man, I think I hope it's okay. But I think that's part of the issue where running like a race gas or something like that, it's lending people to think they're not going to break anything. Well, it's going to let you get farther into the woods before it turns off the lights, so to say. So sometimes I feel really comfortable tuning a gasoline car because it shows its limits very early. It hits its octane limit early. Everything's easy to find. It's only going to do what it's going to do.
I noticed like I pulled a plug on my car and it was very apparent like where the line was on the strap. Like it was, I thought it was.
Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. If you're having trouble, just try a fresh plug and throw it in. Sometimes they just stop annealing nicely. Other times they'll just do it every time. That's like a total voodoo that I learned over time. But I just learned that when you're chasing that strap, the top 3/4 are really safe. If you start going into the 90 is where, like if it's doing 25 horsepower, add a degree, 10 horsepower, add a degree, 0 broken ringland. Yeah, the farther you chase into the threads, the worse off you're going to be. Yeah, pretty much you can guarantee you're not going to find anything there other than money. But we've seen it so many times where, because even on my buddy's Fox, I'm like, I figure this is exactly where it wants to be. And I pulled a plug and it was kind of far down that strap. We pulled 2 and it made the same power. And I was like, yeah, we're too far into that. There's no reason. It's a built motor, but there's no reason to knock the bearings out of it. You may deform the piston and scratch the walls and knock all the rod bearings out of it for no reason. Because Mark's car, we raced that car for a year and it didn't even have glitter in the oil pan, everything. We literally pounded the shit out of that thing for a year. Wow. And it went no slower than 911 that whole year. So, and no issues with oil or bearings and I have people telling me, you're gonna lift the heads, you need trick flow, thicker deck, 1/2-inch head stud. And I'm like, that doesn't have any of that. It has a bullshit intake and it's running this shit ECU and we don't have any of those problems. People are like, no, you have them. You just don't tell anybody. Everyone thought we ran like the overflow tank into the trunk to hide because everyone pushes coolant every pass. Well, it's because they're running 24 pounds at 24 degrees and just, yeah, it's lifting the head off the motor every pass for no reason. Yeah. I've had plenty of cars where they bring it and they're like, it's so fast, and we make a pull, and then I'm like, just pull like 10 degrees of timing out of it. It makes the same power. I'm like, you're 10, you might even be farther than that over. Like, why are you doing that? You're hitting that flame front well before the piston's even on its way up. You're just rattling the bearing and everything. You're like, whatever. They're like, it goes fast.
It goes so that's like
Yeah, it mistakenly goes fast.
throw 36 degrees at your aluminum.
That's why Cameron and I always laugh about that stuff. Yeah.
That was like the thing that like everyone kept hammering like early on when I first started messing with cars. I built a big block Chevy. They're like, oh, 36 total, you're fucking golden, and blah blah blah.
Some of them will go that far, and it always scares the shit out of me because I'm so used to doing a really efficient motor that takes no ignition.
Yeah.
Like one of these, it takes no ignition. And I think the issue with those guys is these take none, and those took so much. They can't let it go. They're like, nope, it takes, I'm like, man, you guys should tune a Subaru.
Yeah.
Like any more than 5 degrees in the mid-range and the rods come out. Like, yeah, they're very sensitive to that stuff. But I had guys plenty of times where they bring a small block and we dyno it, and I'm like, what do you have in it? And they're like, 46. And I'm like, pull 10 out of it. It makes the same power. And I'm like, you're 10 over. Like you eat up bearings? Yeah, no shit. But what is there any other, before I go on tangents about people?
A lot of guys are soft chambering cylinder heads now, cutting that the deck.
To move the flame front?
Yeah, to move the flame front, to slow it down, so it
They can put-
reacts to timing changes, so they can tune it at the track, because there comes a point when the engine doesn't react anymore. When you give 5 or take away 5, it doesn't do shit.
Yeah.
Well, why not run low timing, but they're actually slowing it down to get a shittier burn so they can.
Making the cylinder head inefficient,
Yeah.
just so they can get their timing envy out. Wow, that's unbelievable. But yeah, it's crazy. Like a lot of these guys are like, yeah, I'm on 24 and 12, and I'm like, man, sometimes I can't get over 20 pounds and over 10 degrees, like 8 degrees of timing at 20 pounds of boost sometimes. And people are like, man, how does it go anywhere? I'm like, yeah, it traps like 164. It's a pile of shit. It's clearly not as fast as your car. I keep telling my buddy Hector, like he keeps bending the rods, and I'm like, I can tell you why that's happening, but you're not gonna listen to me.
Now, what he had 12 degrees in it at 25 pounds.
Yeah, I'm like, you're pounding it. I said, you wanna know why it's bending is because your ignition event, your pressure wave is coming down while the rod is still coming up. You're not making any power, you're actually slowing the car down. You're killing all that energy from both ends. Yeah. That's why you can see it on the dyno. You're starting to clash the two pressure waves. That's why the power stops going up. Because you're getting as much that advance right when it needs to, and then you're getting too much advance and you're hitting it. And that will show in the horsepower to the tire or a mile an hour before the car pings. Mostly what I see is like you will see a horsepower drop off, mile an hour drop off, 5 or 6 degrees before you see ignition, pre-ignition, pinging, detonation. So I don't like when people are like, yeah, I just knock sensors and I just push until it, I'm like, you're slowing your car down already and you're knocking on pump gas. Like, that scares me. Plenty of guys have turbo cars like stock Silverado and they're like, I just push until it knocks. I'm like, you have 5,000 pound turbo Silverado. You're just pushing until it pings. Like, that's really dumb.
Why'd you go through all this problem building this thing? You just don't understand. You know what I mean?
Yeah, just beat the shit out of it and not listen to anybody. Or at least you could not listen to a lot of people, but I'm like, I have 1,300 videos explaining how you're beating the shit out of it for no reason. I've broken it so many times. We made a joke the one year, I said we called it Internet Week, where I did everything LS1 Tech told me to. I blew like 10 motors in a row. And I was like, guys, I don't think you're going in the right direction. I'm like, that guy's wrong. Let's listen to this guy. You were wrong too. Then they were like, put E85 in it. I put E85 in it, like torch his cylinder head off that picture where it like oxyacetylene torched the top of the cylinder head out to atmosphere and etched the block. I'm like, yeah, that was clearly correct. Yeah.
Nailed it.
Those are those people that are like, yeah, you're just pushing your coolant into your trunk. I'm like, why? Why are you doing that?
Don't ask the questions. They're like, nah,
Because they would ask me, they're like, how much water does that Mark's car push on a pass? I'm like, none. None. It doesn't have compromised coolant system or head gasket. And they're like, well, is it filled with like block hard, or is it open deck or closed deck? It must be closed deck, or whatever. And we're like, no, it's a stock 6-liter block. There's nothing. And they're like, what cylinder heads are those? How are you not lifting them? I'm like, they're stock 317s with like dirty EGR gunk in the intake ports.
That's what made it so fast.
They're like, you have those trick flows with the thicker deck and you're torquing whatever to 120 pounds. I'm like, no. Yeah, it's weird how I learned all of that. Just don't beat the shit out of it. Like, I don't,
Is there a set of cylinders in there, like 5 and 7 or something that have been known to be
Well,
issues?
almost any engine, the back cylinders are going to be hottest because they're farthest from the water pump. They're farthest from the heat exchange source. So even on like a Supra, you want to add a little bit in the back too. 7 and 8, people always say are problem cylinders, but those are the guys that are beating their shit up. I've broken all of my front cylinders in the last 10 motors I broke. The back one's broken that last time because I'm running it out of fuel on 20 pounds, lean air fuel, it's hot, no methanol, straight 93. So yeah, I broke the last 2 cylinders in that last motor, but it is the hottest cylinder. You want to make sure. That's one of those reasons why I say I like to see an average air fuel of fairly rich, because I notice also there's no difference on the dyno between 1130 and 11.8 air fuel. So why not make that average 11.3? Because every now and then I'll tune someone's Corvette or something on motor, and I'll tell them, yeah, 12.2 air fuel, and they're like, oh. Like my other guy does like 1340, and I'm like, oh man, you smell burning iron, when you're done with that, Like why? And I'll do that. I'll change the air fuel. I'll pull like 12% of fuel out of it and dyno it, and it makes the same, makes sometimes less than it did on a 12.2 air fuel. So they're always. I hate when people say lean is mean, because like most of the time lean is just making terrible power. It's not doing anyone any better.
Well, especially for guys like me, I'm not going to be on a dyno, and like you've kind of done this extensive research of grenading shit for us, where now it's
Well, we call it Internet Week.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite things to bring up.
you realize that like you have this like happy window, and then there's this window where everyone's
It
like,
tells
oh,
you too. It'll
yeah.
tell you that everything's working good.
And it
The
stays
spark
longer.
plug, the mile an hour, and yeah.
Why go to this window of like, fuck yeah, it's awesome, and you're not doing
Yeah.
anything?
That's what I tell people. Like people are like, oh, I'll put 317 heads on a 5.3 or a 4.8, drop my compression into the shit, and I'm like, I mean, people only did that because the advancements in tuning weren't there. This is so easy to modify your ignition curve. I mean, guys that were doing that were locking their distributor and running like a vacuum retard, like pulled timing and boost. They had no scale. They had no way of. They would just lower their compression ratio to add. It's like people. My buddy Brett was here with that nitrous 3rd gen, and I was like, "What jets are in it?" I've done a lot of stuff with nitrous. Nitrous became too expensive though. I'm like, "What jets are in it?" And he's like, "Oh, these jets." And I'm like, "That's fucked up. Don't run that." And he's a hard-headed guy. Like he doesn't want to listen either, and I can't blame him because I would argue with someone forever too. And I'm like, right before we started, I said your solenoids are so small that you're going to cap out before you run out of. You're going to have jets that are huge, but it's not going to make any power probably over a 50 jet. And you should just run a 71 and a 61 right now, and then we'll fix your fueling because you're going to be capped on. I told him all this stuff, and we made an initial pull, and he had these tiny jets in it, and he was pulling 6 degrees of timing, and we made like 50 wheel. And I'm like, you pulled all the power out, and he was running race gas in the standalone fuel cell. I'm like, you pulled 6 degrees for like a 50 shot, and you made 20 wheel, and you don't know and it's pig rich, and you don't understand what's going on. Yeah, and I'm like a carbureted car between 5 and 7 pounds of fuel. I mean, I've done this like a million times. I'm like, you start off with like, I'm like, the solenoids are so small, just put a 70 jet in it, because it's not gonna flow anything over a 50. You might as well pin the nozzle. And then on a carbureted car, it's usually 10 less, and on a fuel injected car with like 40 to 50 pounds of fuel pressure, it's half. So you run a 60 jet and a 30 jet on a fuel injected car. 60 nitrous, 30 fuel, because it's so much more fuel pressure. And then on nitrous, you would run, on carbureted, you would run like a 50 nitrous and a 40 fuel. And it's usually very good. But a lot of times we'll start with the 50-50 and see it go super fat and then pull the 10 just to be happy, sometimes more. So he wasn't listening to me at all. We made like 20 dyno pulls instead of 2. And then he ended up doing everything I told him to anyway at the end, and he's like, I want to make 550, and he still wouldn't do. I'm like, you have straight race You don't even pull any time. I said, I don't even pull. He was spraying 125 shot or something. It was a 53 jet it capped out at. We added nitrous from 53 and up because he wanted to do 27 pulls. And I'm like, it's not going to make any power over like a 50 jet. And it stopped at a 53, so we had a 71 and like a 58 in it then. Because it just, yeah. And then I was like, no ignition retard, 71, 61, 550 tire. And we struggled forever and then eventually made 520 and he was on 2 degrees of ignition retard with too much fuel in it still. And I was like, well, here we are. We could have been here an hour ago. But that's just like a funny thing too. And he does the same thing. He's better. He used to run 46 degrees and it makes peak power at 36. And he's one of those guys that like, he'll turn it down on the dyno and he turns it right back up when he goes to sit. He can't sleep at night without it going right to, he has an ignition retard dial. Yeah. So it'll pull like up to 25 degrees on his dial or something crazy. Because it's locked, so he turns it down to start it and then brings the timing back in. And then when he's spraying, he moves it around when he races, and then when he does nitrous, loves his ignition dial. And I'm like, is that even accurate? It's an MSD product. I don't know. I'd put a light on it.
Oh, the retarded one that says like 0 to 25.
0 to 25. Yeah, and he pulls it down to do the shot and up and down and all over. He loves it. But yeah, it makes peak power at 36 and he turns it right back to 46. I'm like, okay. I've had like 3 cars that like more than 40 degrees of timing, so. And his isn't one of them. Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. What kind of inefficiency do you have to have that acceptable amount of ignition? Or how far is something off to be, I don't know.
It's probably 2 off.
Who knows? Yeah. I mean, is there any other, I'm trying to think of stuff that this thing has, like, it's crazy. You have to almost look at how everything works if you want to implement it, but that's how the boost dial blends the amount of, what do I have in here for?
You could go, I think.
On like if my inlet temps go high, I have it here pulling timing to be safe.
I think Victor put a bunch of questions on the sheet at the end. I think you said you figured a lot of stuff out, right? Over the
Yeah,
past few
I
weeks.
pretty much sorted it all.
Over like everything I was bringing up, all my tangents.
Because I added his stuff at the bottom.
Oh, yeah, I worked on it too at home.
Oh,
I
okay.
added a bunch of the comments from him at the bottom.
Yeah, we talked about traction control, boost control, anti-lag a lot. I showed like the vehicle speed inputs. Yeah, you can add the temperature sensors or pressure transducers through I showed those.
We can do the data logging too a little bit, right?
Oh yeah, I showed how to view the data log and the tune, and Megalog Viewer is like one of the only ones I know where you can see the tune and the data log and see where everything coincides. It's super nice.
Transducers. I was just looking to buy one from Snap-on, so it does crankcase pressure. A couple $100. How much does it cost for a little sensor?
Like a map sensor from eBay is like $15.
Oh yeah, okay, that's price.
Yeah, you can buy a pack of like 0 to 100s for a couple bucks, or you can buy like a 0 to 50. Like you would want more resolution. Like if your monitoring never goes over 50 pounds.
I want to monitor crankcase pressure.
Yeah, I would say you could buy another map sensor from Mike, EFI Source, or you could use if you have stuff laying over, like if there's cars laying around and you go to a junkyard, you can pull like an oil pressure transducer that's 5 volts, 3-wire usually, is almost all 5-volt pressure sensors, and you can plug it in and figure out the scale. I plugged in like the stock oil pressure sensor and got that to work before on my one car. I haven't hooked it up to these yet. I thought for fun doing back pressure, like getting a 0 to 50, like using an oil pressure sensor, and drilling into my hot side, and you have to run a copper cable like a pigtail to take the heat off of the sensor, and then you can screw the sensor into the end of like the pigtail, basically the heat sink. Because otherwise you have like, imagine putting a plastic or metal map sensor with electronics up against your exhaust. Like maybe one that's designed to do that would be okay, but most of them probably melt.
They can do that with a oil pressure sensor?
Yeah.
Or just a cheap Walmart, Harbor Freight oil pressure sensor?
Yeah.
And just get a copper cruiser?
Anything that's 0 to 5 volts, sure. Yep. Or go to like if a Mazda or an old Chevy, whatever, has an oil pressure sensor and it reads high enough for what you want, you can hook it up to crankcase, back pressure, like I said, coolant system pressure, or anything like that.
The big thing seems to be in grenade my engines is crankcase pressure.
Yeah. Once it
Try to
starts.
separate the breather and the PCV, take them right out and whatnot. PCVs never ever seal.
Huh.
And, you know,
Yeah, you can just start data logging it, and one of those things is you might, if it's cheap enough and you get a few, screw a few in all over and make the pigtail long enough and check the pressure at multiple spots. Might be something, because you don't have to buy 5 sensors and try to wire 5. You can just do back-to-backs in a different location.
now we're just thinking building something right into the oil cap.
Yeah, anything like that.
Then you could do like start from like scratch of like you're gonna pull a data log, and then show from the get-go like literally how you start a data log, how to read it after you're done, kind of thing.
Oh, like I can fire up quick and do a data log of cruising or whatever, and
what you look at, how you, what things that you can data log. You're saying you could like show different sensors or whatever, like just so you can see the.
yeah, for sure. I can. I mean, I have tons of logs. I can show you right here how to do. I can at least talk. Right up here is where you would go straight to like start data log, and you can even hit. It has like a fast button like Control L. So if you get the car running and like you're sitting somewhere where you're going to pull out, you can hit Control L and it opens up this. And now that's saving data logs in the project file you created, so you can always go in there. But one thing I like to do is when I'm tuning, is I'll go right to the desktop and save the file. So right now it's data logging, and then the file is there when I'm done. Like it's much easier to get to. It's just like an efficiency thing that I do. And then. Yep, it's saving it for Megalog Viewer, and you can even open it while it's logging. It doesn't actually screw it up. It just keeps writing to it every time you open it. And then after you would do stuff, you would hit stop, and then you could open it and look at it immediately. Oh, yeah, it's doing that shit again. Or maybe it's doing it because it's not connected. Sorry. I didn't do anything, so it didn't log anything. But let me show you, like, I have a ton of Colorado stuff. Fuel okay, 160 pounders. Here. Like we'll show you 160 pounders. Like I just jumped on the highway and rolled into it to see how much more injector more or less I have. So here, like at the top of the window, I just have RPM map, TPS, AFR. Like mostly that's what you're going to be looking at when you're tuning and making sure everything looks good. And you can see here, like I'm just cruising down the highway and I'm rolling into green is 33% throttle, and then yellow is air fuel. And then red is load, white is RPM. You can see I'm rolling into the throttle and the air fuel is coming down. And then already here, like part throttle, I'm already coming up into boost. And then my air fuel comes down nicely, like 150 kPa is, where does it say down here? 8 pounds. Like down here, I actually have boost PSI. So it'll quickly translate. Like I know in a micro, it doesn't show boost, I don't think at all. You have to do the kPa conversion, which I have that kPa calc for download from the wiki. If you search for the kPa calculator, that's an executable I wrote in like Visual Basic, and then you can be like, okay, I hit 153, 7 pounds. But normally what you would look at is, like here I actually had too much fuel in it. I was happy because on 12 pounds I was kind of struggling. It was like my limit. So the first time I rolled into it, this is what I wanted to see was too much, because my duty cycle on the table was slightly higher than it should have been. So I should have too much because I was running out.
Duty cycle and you're going like pulse width, right? Instead of percentage.
I usually look at pulse width.
How do you know like what?
The duty cycle is kind of skewed. Most of the time it's accurate if your injector information is accurate and everything. Basically what you run into, the guy explained it really well the other day. I never summarized it like he did, where he's saying like a standard 4-stroke engine has like 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. And at 6,000 RPM, at 20 milliseconds pulse width, the injector has never had a time to close before it's coming up on the combustion cycle again. So the injector is theoretically wide open, even though you have some mechanical movement room. You are, as your RPM is increasing, you can't get any more fuel in, which is what you see on my data logs there, where the fuel is just walking away, which is what you'll see. And classically, you just want to, like I just looking at my pulse width, because sometimes you have to skew your numbers in computers. So just as like, especially with looking at HP tuners, I like to look at the pulse width, because you might put in injector size 30 to just skew other tables to work for you. So your injector size is completely fucked. And your duty cycle will say 200% when it's nowhere near that.
Well, isn't the milliseconds isn't that how they're calculating the percentage by how long the milliseconds?
Yes. Sometimes the injector size is a little bit incorrect. So your duty cycle is pretty close on. Does it say on here? I can change it. We can take a look at it. I can change my coolant temp here to say duty cycle.
Yeah, that's something.
So roughly here, I would say that this is pretty accurate because my numbers are all good in this tune-up. Some of the tune-ups I have some stuff kind of screwy because we were messing with stuff. I know some of the MegaSquirt tunes, the injector size says like 0.
Yeah.
I don't know how that happened on some of them. You know, I would love to blame someone else, but it might have been me. There's good, you know, but here you can see where it's at like 12 milliseconds and it's at 59% duty cycle. I mean, it makes sense if you look at it math-wise. All it's looking at is the overall that it probably can do and where it's at and figuring out, you know, how far you're into them. But a lot of computers you'll see 100, 130, and you're still okay. You're still at a mechanical limit, but your fuel pressure might be helping you in that situation, like I was explaining. Like weird shit might happen and your numbers might not make sense in some instances. Like I tell people, if fuel's in it, you try not to kill yourself with trying to figure out the numbers. If it has fuel, whatever. If you can adjust it and it's responding to you, everything's probably okay.
So you're going in there now that this has been taking whatever it was taking, you're going in and switching to different, so it logged all of the available.
When you have the laptop connected, it logs every open channel.
But when you don't, it's just an
When you use the SD, you have to tell it. You have to tell it what you want to log. I think there's a thread limit. If you try to add them all, it limits you to like 64 channels or something like that. I mean, like I'm saying, a lot of times it's too much. So I cut mine down to really what I look at most. And then if you want to look at more, you just hook up your laptop and work on that stuff or add it to the SD card data log. But yeah, you can see how I had plenty of fuel there. It came in, and then when I got the pedal down here, it was just like blah. Added plenty. So, I mean, what other? Here you can see, I think you can see my vehicle speed coming up. Yeah, it was spinning a tiny bit here. You can see wheel speed down here at 70 mile an hour in the white. You can see here how it jumped up a bunch of times. So it was laying rubber, essentially. Someone out there like doing something. You can see how it was laying rubber while it was doing that. And then also, here's a good thing. Like when you first roll into your car, when your throttle goes wide open, you want to make sure your boost levels off. That's another important thing. Like I was saying, people come all the time. They don't know any better. And like the guy had 3 wastegate springs in his wastegate. He had no idea. But, you know, it took us a while to figure that out. And then we had to take it apart and fix it. But you want to make sure your boost is leveling off at a respectable level. A neat thing about Tuner Studio is you can actually do this too. You can click and drag end to an end, and it'll give you min, max, and average. So if someone says like how much boost was that, you can look at the, you know, you can go down here to boost PSI, and it says 1230 average, like 11.9 on the low and 12.7 on the high. Sometimes it's nice to just look at what your average was the whole time. But yep, that's a log with the 160s, and then
Can you look at it says sparking name. Oh, okay, that's right there.
yep, it's the white one. Yeah, it dipped down to 16. So what am I at? 12 pounds, 16 degrees. Yep, and also one funny thing is you'll see these are all pretty smooth. You might be data logging a car and you'll get like peaks, valleys out the ass. You probably have a ground issue or something else going on. You should not have that much noise in your, if you're getting a lot of noise in, you're getting a lot of bullshit out. A lot of times you'll see like my pulse width comes up and it's really smooth. Sometimes when you check a data log or someone's car, the pulse width is all over the place, and that's either a fuel table stability thing, like I was saying, you have too much here and too much there and it's struggling, or the sensors are just, you're getting garbage and it's just, you'd want to sort that out because it's telling the injector how much to open in, you know, thousandths of a second. You want to make sure it's as smooth as possible. Also, like if you're getting a lot of noise on your TPS, that usually indicates a problem. Sometimes people have 5-volt problems. Because if your TPS is screwy, there's a chance your map is probably screwy because it's on all the same 5-volt circuit. So you're going to get junk on 2 of your sensors. You're really going to be chasing your tail. And then here you can also see like my EGO correction. And it looks like it's huge. But what's funny is if you look here at 98% down here, that means it's pulling 2% of fuel. And then here as I came into boost, it was fine at 11.7. And then you can see as it started to become rich, it started to pull fuel out. It just wasn't fast enough. I don't have it making big corrections because my air fuel is usually very good to start with. So on a Holly system, it would be like 40%. You know, there's no way to like slow it down almost. But I don't want it to be that bad. If it's tanking air fuel, I want it to be tanking because I want to know that I have to take it out. But you can adjust that so that you never have to think about that. You might look at that and it'll be like, oh, I was pulling 15% at boost. Or I was adding 15, which is like bad situation. You don't want it to be ever, it's okay if it's pulling a little, but you don't want to be making up majority of your safety system by just on the fly checking your air fuel. Yeah. But there you can see it's actually working. It started pulling, but it was a short. I just rolled into it on the highway and burned the fucking tires off and had a fat air fuel and lifted. So it didn't really even have time to mess with it. But it's neat to see all of it working and then the vehicle speed and everything else. What else? Does anyone else have any other? And you can see here vehicle speed 1 and 2. Like, see how the screwdriver is a little dinky sometimes? How it shows 0 until it hits like 50 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour sometimes. It's been getting worse. I think it's accumulating dirt or rust. It's obviously not ideal. I didn't think it would work, and I thought it would be really funny if it did. And it worked really well to the point of where my buddy owns 417 Motorsports, Blake Hughes. He built like the Krusty Nova and all those crazy cars, and he's like, he called me the one time. He's like, I can't fucking believe that works. He's like, that is a joke I would tell somebody to insult them to their face, and it works. So you made an ass out of me. He's like, I would if he wrote down and lost a bet, he would have had to eat his words like as spaghetti. Like he's like, I would have had to cut a paper and eat it.
Do you have the data logs that you were saying that Mustang, that twin turbo Mustang?
I have from the dyno, so I can show you those. But he emailed me the one, and then I deleted the file after I checked it because it was like within 1% fuel correction. I was like, oh, you're good. He only sent me the one pass. What's that? Who's that? Oh yeah, his name is like really hard to pronounce, so I call him Henry Swanky. Yeah, that one that made 700. You see the video of that? No. Oh, it's an L33 and a C5. It's an aluminum 5.3 and a C5. That's why I always tell everyone to do, because everyone wants an LS1 and wants to spend money on a useless motor. Like, why do you want to spend? Yeah. Well, we've run motors with missing one head stud, and we've done all sorts. Right? Yeah. I actually broke a head bolt off in one, and we laughed, and we drilled it and tapped it with like a 1/2-inch thing and put a 1/2-inch hardware store bolt in the cylinder head. We probably didn't even need it. No, we tapped the iron block to a larger bolt and drilled the head out so the bolt would. But anyway, yeah, that's. We've done plenty of that. Ackerman. And then here is where we wrote down like what the duty cycle on the boost controller equals what PSI, but let me open a few of these and see what it looks like. I'm rolling into it. Oh, it's idling. Oh, what is that? Oh, we were testing the anti-lag. I'm like, why does it look like shit? That's because it's bouncing off the anti-lag. Where's the dyno pull? Yep, 6,500 max RPM. Yeah, here you can see it's like it's got a nice transition. Like when you roll into it, it's going into 12s, 11s, and then obviously this had too much fuel in it up top. 233 kPa, 19 pounds. We were doing dyno pulls on this thing, and it doesn't make like any power over from 14 to 19. It's just out of turbo. The turbine or something is. I'm sure if we put a back pressure gauge on it, it's probably making 14 pounds of boost and 40 pounds of back pressure. It's so lopsided because it's a 400-inch motor with little 65 turbines on the turbos. It's like it can't breathe. I'm sure it's just. And that's why we kept pulling ignition out of it. You see, I'm at like 12 degrees, and we just kept lowering ignition, and it just wasn't. Just making the same power with almost no ignition because it's backed up so bad. There's no point in advancing the flame front. Nothing can get out. So you'll see that a lot. Sometimes cars will take much less timing, and you're like, there's an underlying issue here is because, you know, it can't take any advance. But
pulse width was like 20 point something. What's like max?
It's tough to say because look, I mean, that one guy's, the math makes sense where he says like 20 pulse width and 6,000 RPM is your maximum. But see, this is a car with a 4303 and a rising rate regulator. And like I said, sometimes you can't trust the numbers because this thing has fuel out the ass. Like it just bends those numbers. And then what's funny is something like this, if we fix the turbines or change the cam to not be so heavy on the exhaust, it has a big, stupid big cam in it and stupid small turbos. We might change that and it might pick up 130 horsepower to the tire and use less fuel. Like you'll see weird stuff happen. Sometimes you can't always judge like, oh, the car's taking more fuel, it must be making more power. No, like something weird is happening here. Like it's not making that much of the tire. It seems like it's using all the injector, but yeah. You can see how this one's like really smooth. I wonder if I can find someone's car who had like ground issues where everything looks like shit. Like, but crank trigger cars in the MS3 look so smooth most of the time. Were there anything you want to look at like in that twin turbo car? I can open up the tune-up and show you.
I have an aftermarket fuel pressure sensor in basically my rail. It's in a place where it gets fuel. But anyways, my fuel pressure is like bouncy, like jaggedy on the dial.
Huh. Like how much is it swinging?
Probably 5 pounds.
Oh, okay. It might be just like you could change maybe the sensitivity, like the lag rate on the sensor, and slow it down. What's happening? What's funny is ECUs and stuff like MegaSquirt are so sensitive. What you might be seeing is the injectors opening and closing. It's so funny. Like you can see wideband information. You can speed up the lag limits on the computer to the point of where you're seeing cylinder pockets of O2 data. You might see a ton of variation through the O2 sensor, and you're like, what's going on? It's actually every cylinder opening, you can see that much data. So sometimes you have to slow it down so you're not seeing like garbage. So I'm assuming that's the injector is pulsing and fucking with the rail pressure that minute. Normally you wouldn't see that because you'll have like a liquid-filled gauge and it's taking that shock. But I'm sure once the motor's running, you can see like a regular, if you hook up like a compressor gauge, it's not oil filled or liquid dampened, and it's just an free air gauge, I bet it bounces. Yeah, sometimes you can speed up the,
I got liquid and it doesn't move.
yeah, you can slow down the sample rate on that if you want to, I think, in the regular generic inputs, lag. Set it to like 50. It'll cut it down a little bit, or 75. Take it to a point.
Is that this car?
Take it to a point. Oh yeah, it's under advanced and it's like the fourth one down, generic sensors. Yep. And the lag, 100 means no lag, I think. 100 means as fast as the sensor will give you data, I think.
50.
That's 50? You could, I forget which movement it is. I think maybe 0 is no smoothing, so you might go 75 to enhance some smoothing on that. But it's probably...
Is there anything else on that car that you want to go through live and learn now? Because you can probably do this along with some other things if you had some stuff that you were looking at beforehand. I know the car was just in the rollers recently anyway, but is there anything else that you were looking at since that anyone else may benefit from too?
Not really. I mean, I was gonna try and hook up that dial boost. I had it with, but I didn't get it wired in or anything.
Yeah, okay.
You know, I wanted to possibly set up those perimeters or whatever, but it's still got the 10-pound spring in it, so I actually want to lower that down to a 6 and then be able to pop, basically go between 6 and
Yeah, your limit.
15.
And then you can also do, like I said, like if the dial is capable of going too far, you can set your upper and lower. So you turn the dial all the way up and it won't exceed 50% duty cycle or something like that. You can make it so that no matter what, you can't hurt it.
Yeah.
I can show you, like, I don't have to run my car. I can plug it in and show you when the input for the dial is this like long vertical gauge here. So when I turn it, it shows that like going up and down, and that's just the input of the dial, and you can see how it directly correlates. Because if you show boost target or boost duty, it doesn't show any duty cycle until you hit that RPM and load limit for the boost controller to turn on. Because when they used to enable the boost controller all the time, it'll just rattle the shit out of the boost controller, and people will be like, why is it? It would piss everybody off. because they would mount it to their fender, and you'd turn the car and it'd be and you're like, what the fuck is that? Like, it's just rattling in the fender. So they made it now that when it only turns on at like fairly high KPA, like 90, like when you're starting to enter a boost threshold. Because that was one of the first things we learned with like Ryan Gregory's. We had to set like on and off limits because it drove him nuts and it just the whole time. So you won't see the target until the car is actually, like especially on closed loop, you'll floor the car and you'll see it like modifying the duty cycle all over the place to try to maintain a boost curve. Like say his Mustang, sometimes the boost will drop off up top because the turbines are so small, I'm assuming. And what we could do is give it a closed loop target, and on a raw duty cycle like 40%, it'll hit 10 and drop to 8 pounds by the end of the track. You could give it a closed loop and say, I want 12, and it'll come up, hold 12, and if it starts to fall off, it'll keep raising. You'll see a level boost line, but your duty cycle was growing the whole time. So that's one neat thing about using closed loop. The same thing with like the O2 sensor. You can look at the log and see how far it was off and how much it was compensating